It's ready.
Is it going?
Yep.
Okay. You got good close-up of my buttons. All right. We're going to talk a little bit, we're going to go back a little bit today to talk about Figaro and Don Giovanni. And then we're going to go on into the 19th century, into the Romantic period. And the reason I'm going to do that is because Figaro, and we talked about this a little bit in the discussion board, but you guys weren't on the discussion board yet. So Figaro is really a classical opera. And that means a lot of things. It means something for the drama, and it means something for the music. Okay? And Don Giovanni, this is my contention, also by Mozart, is I'm arguing, at least in its finale, the way it ends, is a romantic opera. Or if that's an exaggeration, the ending is romantic, for reasons that we'll talk about today a little bit. So what I want to do is I want to go back, talk about these two operas a little bit in the context of their dramas and their music, and then talk about how Romanticism started, especially in Germany, because that was really the focus in the early years. Again, and I say this also for the people at home, start with this lecture when you're thinking about Romanticism. Don't start with the reading. Camille has, once again, a long list of categories and characteristics of Romantic music, and they're confusing because they come from various countries, they come from various phases of Romanticism, and they're all kind of jumbled together. So it's much easier to understand than that. It's actually much more cohesive. It does spread out and become more multivariate at the end of the century. And that's what he's taking all of that and putting it at the beginning. That makes it hard to understand. So we'll start with, we'll really start with the entrance of the ghost in Don Giovanni. And that will be it's an oversimplification, but there's some truth to it. That will be the beginning point of Romanticism in the early, or late 18th century, early 19th century. Okay? So, let us talk one more time about why, since classicism was our last age, why Figaro was classical. And just as a summary one more time, I want to review classical art, music, literature, pretty much everything in Europe and the United States was based on the idea of nature. What does that mean? They said that nature is, when you look at nature, you're looking at the physical world, but you're also seeing, this is both balance and harmony, because harmony means two things are in and of each other. When you look at the physical world, especially the physical world of nature, you're also seeing, not with your eyes, but you can sense that there is also something spiritual in there, they would have said. Does that make sense? In other words, there's growth, there's energy, there's spirit, there's consciousness in us. We are part of nature too. And so the classical idea is that the entire world is really, the universe is a kind of harmony of the things that you see, the physical world, and the things that you don't, the spiritual. But you can sense that that spiritual something is in the world, in the physical world of nature. So far, so good. That means that when we make art and music and literature, we want to make art and music and literature that makes us feel that, because that makes us feel what is most important in life. And so, let's start with the drama of Figaro. The drama of Figaro is about, let me put this up here, spiritual, is about love, which is really a spiritual thing, right? And marriage, which is not, necessarily anyway, right? That is to say, this is a form that we human beings have come up with. We've invented it, we've constructed it, we've sort of put rules on it. And love is something that we have no control over. We have some control over it. We can guide it. But it really exists beyond us. The Greeks already, the classical Greeks and the later European Greeks would have said, love is spiritual, marriage is, well, not physical, but at least earthly, right? Human, societal. And that combination of the things that we define and the things that are beyond us, the things that are physically or societally defined, and the things that are spiritually beyond us and that enter into us, or not, more or less, that balance, that harmony, is the classical ideal. So, the problem in Figaro is that this isn't working very well, right? We have Figaro and Susanna, a young pair who work at the court of the Duke, or the Count really is what is his rank. And they are engaged, right? And the opening scene shows you Figaro over here. You can point to that if you want to, Jill. Figaro is on the left, Susanna is on the right. She works for the Count, he works for the Count. He's actually a gardener, she's a maid, or a chambermaid, you might say, or I'm not sure exactly what her functions were. But she's telling, in this opening scene, well, we'll start with the beginning. Figaro on the left, he's already got a yardstick in his hand. He's measuring for the bed, because they're getting married, and this is where they're going to be living, in the castle. And she says, hey, she's trying to get his attention, and he's just going 10, 15, 20, and she says, hey, you know what? And she's going 25, hey, Figaro, you know, that sort of thing. So there's already sort of a very gently, very subtly, a little disjunct, right? He's not listening, she's trying to get his attention. She tells him, in the course of this conversation, that the Count is making passes at her, or trying to make passes at her, and is trying to get his way with her. And he thinks, but actually this is one of the dilemmas of the play. So as the story goes, and you've some of you have read, I don't know, have you guys read the synopsis in the? I think so. You know that they're the Count and the Countess are not really in love anymore, or so it seems, or the Countess is trying to get his love back and it's not working. And Figaro and Susanna have their problems because Susanna is afraid that the Count is trying to have his way with her. And so this dilemma, and then of course it gets much more complicated as you can read in the synopsis, is basically the problem that this marriage or relationships or the conventional places that we're supposed to contain these our feelings and our relationships and our spiritual reality, is not lining up with this, our spiritual reality, right? And the marriage is not working between the Count and the Countess, and the potential marriage of Figaro and Susanna is in danger. So that's the dilemma, right? The reason this ends classically is because this is put together back again with this. And so the spiritual and the physical, the societal and the ephemeral, you might say, come back together in one unity. Does that make sense? So that's the classical resolution. So far so good. We're going to see that in the music, and that a classical resolution demands, requires, or feels appropriate to have a kind of classical sound in its music. And so the resolution of Figaro is these wonderful arches of melody, which are exactly what we've been describing when we talked about Mozart's piano concerto, for example. Right? Does it make sense? Okay, so far so good. That's basically the argument, and we'll see it in a moment. I'll show you in a little more detail with the music, so we get a little more into that. So this is the week that we missed because of the what was it, ice round last week. Okay, the romantic, Don Giovanni. The same dilemma, sort of. We've got a Count who is really abusing his power and trying to sleep with, in this case, as many women as possible. And there are some sort of funny sides to that, but it's also pretty serious. The problem here is that at the end of this dilemma, the Count refuses to repent, to change his ways. He's gone so far that really it's that any chance of form and content of spiritual and physical and societal getting brought back into harmony is pretty much broken. And the result is that he's pulled down by this ghost of a man he has killed down into hell. It's an appropriate ending, really. And it ends without these arches of melody. The music is this very strange, the melody is a strange monotone, remember that? And the accompaniment are these strange, dissonant scales that sort of clash with that one note that the ghost is singing. And so this dissonance means sound and clashes, sounds that clash with each other. That is typical of a non-classical ending to a non-classical resolution, right, or lack of resolution. Does that make sense? So that's kind of the basis of, at least the beginning, of what's going to become Romantic style. Now the other interesting thing is, now I want to talk for a moment about what Romanticism means as it moves forward into the 19th century. The Romanticists, and it's not just Mozart, later on, a group of especially poets and philosophers came up with the idea that nature is no longer interesting because, this was their theory, when you look at nature you can't really know that there's anything spiritual in it. This notion, they lost that faith, so to speak, that in the physical there was the spiritual. They believed very strongly in the spiritual, but they didn't believe that the physical world contains it. They were trying to look for something beyond all this. Now, how do you do that, of course, right? It's not an easy thing to do. You could go to church, but most of them weren't that interested in that approach. They weren't interested in an institutional approach to the beyond. They were looking for something transcendental in a much more, I don't know, sort of intuitive way, let's say, right? Not something that was defined by an institution, but something that was sort of undefined, that was there you could only sense. That, in other words, the Romanticism in many ways is about that sixth sense. It's hard to say that, sixth sense. Okay? So, in other words, the physical, I'm going to exaggerate a little bit, although I think they would have agreed, is basically dead. I mean, it's there, but it's uninteresting because what I want to do is I want to go beyond the physical, this is less than in mathematical terms, I want to find the spiritual beyond. Another way of saying this is transcendental. Get out of the way so you can see the word. Transcendental transcend means to go above or beyond. And one of Liszt's famous piano pieces was called the Transcendental Etude. Right? So he was playing with these ideas. Franz Liszt, of course, was German, so he, at least he lived most of his life in Germany, and he was very familiar with this thinking that came down from, and it's a very specific place, but we can do that another time. Okay, so how do we create art, music, and literature that gives us a sense of something beyond this world? That's the question. And one of the things we'll look at today is a painting. How do you do that at a painting? When you're a painter, you have to paint something physical, right? So you're stuck with a paint and a canvas, and in your eyes, there's no other way of seeing it, right? For a painter. For a musician, you're talking about sound, which feels a little bit more like a sixth sense because there's nothing to see. It's not physical, right? It's just sound. Of course, it is physical. It's vibrations in your side. You could pretend that it's not. Make sense? So far, so good. So that's basically, if you understand this dichotomy, classical tries to find the spiritual in nature, in the world. That means music, emotion, which is a spiritual thing, is found in form, the societal part of music. So it's the conventional four-bar phrases and so those things that we talked about before. So still with me? All right. And Romanticism tried to get beyond nature, so they also tried to get beyond form. So again and again, you're going to find musicians in the Romantic period who try not to do these things that we saw in in Mozart. Dee da 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 dee da da da, 4 and a 1 and 2 and 3 and a 4 and a 1 and 2 and a 3 and a 4 and a 1 and 2 and 3, 4. I can't go down the low, so I'm taking it up. Okay, make sense? So that's the classical balance, a little bit of emotional rise and fall, along with a very kind of logical, symmetrical thing. What a romantic artist will do, well, we'll just take a look. What does Mozart do when the ghost comes on stage? Instead of a rise and fall of a melody, it goes like, well, it starts out, actually, let me start it out, it goes, ni ti ti, bom, Don Giovanni, an octave leap. And then it goes dee ba bom ba bom ba bom ba bom ba bom ba bom bom. What kind of a melody is that? It just goes like this. You can see that these balances that the classical age had set up, Mozart already, at the end of his career, starts tearing down and flattening out and creating tension and dissonance that sound really interesting, but for totally different reasons. Okay, now let's listen to that for a moment. How's our time? I think we can do this. There's a wonderful classical moment at the beginning of Figaro. And we can take a look at that now. And I want to show it to you, and then I'm going to play a moment of it for you so that you can see when the two of them are not communicating, the classical balance here doesn't work, right? And as soon as Figaro starts listening to what Susanna is saying and starts responding to her, suddenly they're singing in classical arches. And Mozart was brilliant with this sort of thing. So if they're not communicating, then the music doesn't come together, his music and her music. And I'll show you how that works in a moment. His music sounds a little, well, it sounds a little like the Ghost. It's just kind of disjunct, and he's got something else on his mind if he's measuring for his bed, right? So even that is part of the little tension there. Okay, here goes. Let's see. I'm going to translate as we go along, and then I'm going to stop every once in a while and just poke it out on the piano so you can just hear a little bit more clearly what's going on. Let me do that first. When Figaro first says his first number that he's measuring, his melody is this. Isn't that beautiful? That's not a classical arch, right? Okay, his next second melody is this. Oops, I'm sorry, right? His next melody is this. And his next melody is this. Whoops. Okay, yeah, so minus my mistakes. That wasn't in the score. All right, so those aren't classical melodies at all. He's not really, I mean, he's doing something totally disjunct in a sense. She tries to get his attention, and he keeps on going measuring. So she has a nice little melody. She's trying to communicate. He's really in his own mind, right? So two different styles that don't quite add up. Not yet, anyway. So we're going to wait until they add up. And the moment he starts listening to her, then they come together. So here goes. $10, $20, $30, $36. Yeah, it'll work. Tell me, don't you think this hat is nice? Don't you think it really fits me nicely? 5. Don't you think the Figaro? 10. Don't you think it looks nice, Figaro? 20. Figaro, 30. Figaro. Right? Yeah, he says, but he's not listening. Yeah, I see. Yeah. Now he's heard her. It's a nice hat. So he sings her melody, right? There's a problem with this, though, the way they set it up. Because the next thing she says is, listen to what I'm saying. And the director had him come up to her and talk to her, right? But if she says, listen to what I'm saying, he doesn't come up to her and talk to her. That's bad direction, right? He's still saying, yeah, I see the hat is a nice hat. He's not turning, he's not looking at her. Otherwise she wouldn't say, hey, look at me, right? So he says what she wants him to say. Yeah, it's a nice hat, but he hasn't even looked at it. That's the truth of the thing. Because otherwise she wouldn't say, hey, look, right? So that was kind of not close reading. But he does sing her melody, so that much he's got, right? He knows that she's trying to communicate. He echoes it, but he's not really communicating at all. Does that make sense? So she says, hey, look at me, and because that's her next line. And then eventually she's going to force him to look, and then they sing in tandem. And listen what happens to the harmony all of a sudden. He's not going yum boom. He's singing her melody a third below, and they make a harmony together. It's a beautiful little psychological use of music and harmony to echo non-communication and then communication. Now she's starting to get his attention.
Get batteries.
Now they're going to sing a real duet, because now he's finally listening. That's it. That's all I wanted to show you at the beginning. Nobody could do this better than Mozart. And so at the end, as soon as he starts listening to her, instead of she going, and he going plum plum, they're starting to sing like this. That's not exactly the melody, but something like that, right? So that little harmony is a little classical balance. It's a harmony that fits together, and it's also, by the way, in 4-bar phrases. Suddenly it's come together and they're communicating. That's classical art. Now, of course, what happens in the course of the opera, and most of you have the synopsis and the resolution when the Count finally sees the error of his ways, which he can do yet, and Don Giovanni refuses to do, brings us to another beautiful classical finale. And let's see if I can get that for you. Yeah. I think I'm going to let you. Maybe I'll just poke it out a little bit here. We're going to cut a little bit to the chase because it's taking a little longer than I thought.